you can actually reduce or hopefully eliminate water as a factor. I mean, that seed has a genetic potential. If you take corn, the genetic potential, I'm told, is about 800 bushels an acre. Does anyone here grow 800 bushels an acre? Even the guys winning the crop competitions, the best I've heard is in the 500 range. So there's still a lot of genetic potential that's missing. So everything you do when you take that seed out of the bag is you're slicing off yield potential, everything you do. So we just want to make sure that water, or availability to water, which has the single biggest impact on yield and quality, is not one of those things that's causing that yield drag, that's not bringing you down. So how do we do that? We have a strategy. And as Jordan pointed out, that strategy is all about planning on when do we plant based on ET curves. It's about how much water we put in the soil. It's about all of that. But at the end of the day, in the heat of the battle, it's really hard sometimes to sort of stay on top of it. So a good plan is essential. And that plan, as I like to talk about it, is an irrigation template. It's what happens inside the season. But as with GroGuru now, we're going to broaden out that template to what happens right across the year, as far as having the right amount of water in the soil, or the right amount of water available to the plant. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to start right at the beginning and talk about converting water into money. It's the economics. Steve hopefully will give me his blessing. We're going to understand how plants react to moisture. We're going to understand how to use the tools to listen to your crop. We're going to understand how to read soil moisture graphs. What is it all about? Going to understand how to create a strategy, and that's really where it all comes together. Different crops have different strategies. There's the right amount of water to put on at the right time, and so that's what that strategic irrigation management is all about. So we're going to look at some different templates for different crops. I could probably cross out wheat because it's a poverty grass, as some people call it, but around here anyway. Then look at water budgets. So once again, we touched on that earlier this morning about splitting the pivot and using water in different ways to maximize your availability, or using what you have in the right way. And then just talk about risk management, season to season, year to year, that sort of thing. So the economics of water. Well, I might get some yield for no irrigation, dryland agriculture, assuming you've got some rainfall. But every bit of water I put on, I'm going to get an increased yield up to a point. There is such a thing as too much water. Cotton will let you know that. Corn, not so much. So the yield response to corn, so different crops have got different yield responses to water. Let's just get that up front. And if you think about this, and it might be a while, when I first started here, 2010 was the first season that I really got going. And everyone was tending to over-irrigate, and they were irrigating the wrong way. And so the best explanation I had for this was, okay, a grower who's got good water available, you've got 20 different wells out there, and some are putting out 600 gallons a minute, and some are putting out 900 gallons a minute, and you're running them for the same number of hours. You just start on this day and stop on that day. So theoretically, I've put half as much water again on my well that's putting out 900 gallons a minute, yet my yield didn't change. In fact, I might have got slightly lesser yield on my high water. Why? Because I'm probably washing fertilizer out of the soil. So it's not about how much you've got, it's how you use it. And it's also about understanding that and this is what Steve talked about this morning, if I've got a little bit of water, I'm going to get a lot of value because I'm down here on the curve. And every bit of water I've put on, I'm going to get a better return up to a point. Then you start to get that law of diminishing returns. And so the biological, there's a penalty for overwatering cotton, but so different crop, cotton is a lot more responsive to overwatering than corn or other. Wheat is suck up all the water you can give it, and so hard to overwater wheat. But anyway, where I was going with this was there is an economic optimum for irrigation, and so think about, you've probably heard other people talk about, hey, let's irrigate to 60% of ET, or let's irrigate to 75% of ET, or something like that. It gives you an opportunity, it leaves some money on the table if you get rainfall. It's going to top you up, it's not going to push you over the edge, so it's actually going to help you. But it also in Australia, where I'm from, we've got twice as much land as we've got water. And so people will spread that water as thinly as they can. They're not expecting to grow the maximum yields. They're not going to win a yield competition. But what they're trying to do is convert that water into money. And so you've got to understand where you sit on this relationship of converting water into money. And so if you're constrained because you've only got a certain number of pivots, you've only got so much land, then you're going to treat it slightly differently. You're going to try and get all the yield you can, but just be aware that there will be a point at which that law of diminishing returns ain't worth it. And so you're out there irrigating, and is that extra inch really going to help you, or is it just going to cost you money? So let's be upfront with that. The next thing is, I put water on a crop. What does it do to the crop? How does the crop respond? And it's really important to know this. So crops are made up of cells, and anyone that's heard me talk before, there's some stock standard slides, but I always go back to the beginning because it really helps to understand when you irrigate, what are you doing to the plant? And it's part of you have to understand that to create a strategy. So if a plant's made up of plant cells, let's think of it like it's made of Lego, right? And I want to grow that plant quickly. And so if I've got more Lego bricks, I'm going to grow that plant unconstrained. If I've got larger Lego bricks, it's going to grow really, really large, really quickly. And so those two, how many Lego bricks you've got, how many plant cells you have available, is due to photosynthesis. It's growth, pure and simple. But how big those cells are, cell expansion really depends, is greatly affected by water availability. And so we've got these two lines up here. You've got the response to photosynthesis and the response to cell expansion based on how much water I have available. So this full point means water is not limiting. So all the water, the plant doesn't have to think about water. There's no stress or strain or anything. And then you heard us talk about, well, the first half of what's contained in the soil is given up without any reduction in growth. Well, pretty much the first half of that is given up without reducing photosynthesis. So, but as soon as I start reducing water, I'm actually going to start to just slightly reduce the cell size. So let's make this real for you. If I'm irrigating my front lawn, it's well drained, I've got beautiful loam soil, I've got drainage under it, I put my sprinkler on, come on 5 a.m. every morning in summer, I just keep it topped up. It's just topped up and topped up, right near this full point. Well, my lawn's going to grow so fast, I'm going to be mowing it every 4 or 5 days. It's rank growth. Whereas if I let that lawn dry out a little bit, and then wet it up, and let it dry out, and then wet it up, what I'm doing is I'm coming down this soil moisture spectrum to a point where I'm not letting the growth suffer, I'm just making the cells a little smaller. And so it's still green, it's still producing the same number of blades of grass, they're just smaller. And so I don't have to mow it as often. I might be mowing it every 7 to 10 days, not every 4 or 5 days. I want that. So I'm going to change my irrigation schedule to give me that outcome. I'm being strategic with my irrigation management. It's a strategy that I'm employing because I don't want to mow the lawn. But if I'm cutting hay and I want to cut lots of grass, or if I'm cutting silage or something like that, you've got to flip it around and say, I want as much as I can grow. So I don't want to let it drop beyond a point where even, well, I mean, an extreme example is like lettuce or something like that. If you've ever been to a market garden area, you'll see sprinklers going on all day because they tend to irrigate 3 times a day or more. They want to keep those lettuces and all your salad mix, your salad greens, really operating right up at this top point, because if I let that slow down, I'm robbing myself of what I'm selling. But in other crops, like cotton, that extra cell size at the wrong time means that I'm going to grow this big bushy plant that is it's putting energy into the areas that I don't need it. And so I can actually be strategic about where I sit on this spectrum, and depending on what I'm trying to achieve. So another example is wine grapes. If people irrigate too soon, you get this beautiful big lush canopy, but then you can't drive up and down the rows to get your tractor up and down the vine rows. And this big, beautiful, lush canopy gets diseased because the wind can't blow through and it's shaded and it just ends up getting diseased. So it's actually causing me a problem. So if I hold off the water and hold off this lush, rank growth, then I get a smaller canopy, but guess what? The vine grows like way, way more leaf than it needs to generate the sugars, the photosynthesis to fill the berries. So I can get that more in balance, the canopy, because what these guys do that get the irrigation wrong is they grow all this canopy and then go, oh, that was a mistake. They cut it off and leave it just sitting there because they can't drive up and down the rows and they're getting too much disease. So they're putting water into something that's not going into their back pocket. In fact, it's costing them to manage it. So we've got to direct the water into the part that pays. So we can come up with a zone of soil moisture that is a target zone. And this is a really wide target zone because the textbook had it this way because it was a flood irrigated example. And with that flood irrigated example, it was a long time between wetting the soil up and hitting the refill point. And of course, crop started to stress and hook wilted and then they irrigated again. But what I can do if I've got a better irrigation system, drip being the probably sort of, I could irrigate every day if I wanted to, pivots, every, well, how often, we can talk about that. But I can manipulate this zone not only in how wide it is, but also where I move it at different times of the season. So that's really important because I'm going to flip this on its side. And this is your full point. It's too high on the graph. And this is my refill point, and it's too low on the graph. But you've got to think about what's going on inside the plant when we look at the data. So let's look at some data. I've got a probe out there that is taking a reading every 15 minutes. Every 15 minutes. Now, you could have every 30 minutes, every hour, and you're just going to get slightly less resolution. But because I'm looking at it so often, or measuring so often, I can actually watch the plant take water out of the soil during the day and then resting at night, and during the day and resting at night. So that's pretty cool. In fact, that's right there the magic in irrigation management to a large extent, certainly using capacitance probes. Because what that's showing me is the heartbeat of the crop. It's how much it's drinking each day. And if it's got a big drink, wow, rank growth. It's taking, so I'm not right up near the top as far as that cell expansion. What that's telling me is that water is freely available. It's just going through that plant. So a big step is rank growth. So if I'm a cotton grower, think of that like internode length, right? I've had 3 days where I've got this massive internode. Up here I've got small internodes, and down there I've got small internodes. Think of it like that. It's in terms of how that plant's growing. So that heartbeat of the crop is really cool. And apologies for people that have been using probes for the last 6 or 7 years because you've heard all this before, but it's really important. So what the plant's telling me, and this is flood irrigated cotton from Australia, and you won't tend to get any of this. So don't ignore it because it's important, but what's happening in this particular slide is that we're wetting the soil up, and then we're seeing these small steps, and then big steps, and small steps. I don't have to know anything about what the soil moisture content is. I don't have to know anything other than what's the plant response to soil moisture. When I get above this point, soil moisture, growth is constrained. When I get below this point, growth is constrained. They're both stresses. Just happens that you're not going to have one of them with pivots in this area. So what you're going to find is that you're going to start out with really, really large steps, and they just get smaller and smaller. But so you can start to pick the inflection point as to when growth is starting to slow down. If I have a cloudy day, if I have some other kind of stress, I'm going to see this in the heartbeat of the crop. It's going to be a small step, or it's a cloudy day. And so, as I said before, once we've got this whole season mapped out, we can come back and look at how that crop grew each and every day of the season. So really important. So the plant's actually guiding us to a zone of moisture that it's happiest growing in. And I can use that reference to say, well, ideally, if I'm trying to grow this big leafy crop, I'll keep it in this zone, which is what the guys in Australia growing cotton used to try and do. Except they never, when I went out with my neutron probe all summer, I'm slopping around in flood irrigated clay soils. in mud up to your ankles or more, halfway up your shins, you never wanted to walk out to those probe sites that have just been irrigated, because you're going to mess them up. You're going to stop the water flowing down the rows, you're going to mess up the site, and it's going to slow you down, and it's a real pain because it's like 110 degrees and you're standing in mud. So it's just not pleasant. So no one ever got that data. All we did was look at this, and then we knew exactly when it started to slow down and the crop looked stressed. So, hey, that's bad, keep it in this green zone. But in so doing, we pushed it back into the blue zone because it was flood irrigated, and we slowed the crop down. We could never break out of a 3 bale an acre average. Across the whole industry it was like that, until we started putting probes out there, and we started to look at this and go, oh my gosh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's the 6th day on a 12-day cycle. Half the time it's sitting there not growing, not turning my water into money. So what are we going to do about it? Let's let the crop tell us down here when that's slowing down to a point that's this day here is equal or worse than the days up there. Then I'm going to irrigate. So they pushed the cycle for a couple of days. Guess what happened? The crop got thirsty. It looked thirsty, put its roots a little deeper. Well, just as it was getting thirsty with the old way of irrigating, we'd flood it, and it just couldn't breathe, literally, had a 2-foot root system. So you'd filled all that top 2 feet up with water, you'd stalled the crop out, and it didn't have enough energy to even put its roots deeper. So you were artificially keeping the roots shallow. As soon as we let it get thirsty, put its roots deeper, now they're down 3 foot. The next cycle, now they're down to 4 foot, and so on. They just get going down and down and down. Guess what? 3rd, 4th, 5th foot didn't waterlog. Now I've got roots in an area that didn't waterlog, so now I can start to grow. There's less days here and even less days there of waterlogging. So guess what happened? Yield went up. Not just a little bit, it went up by 30%. Went from 3 bales to 4 bales, just like that. One change. And guess what? I've also saved 2 days here and 2 days there and 2 days here, and I'm putting on at least 1, usually 2 less irrigations. There's water I can put on another field, I can turn that into money. There's pumping and other costs that I don't have, and I've just put on an extra bale, and that extra bale is basically profit. So now I'm really, really happy. Now those guys went from 4 bales to 5 bales, and the good guys are growing 6. And yes, there's genetics and everything else, but water had a massive, massive impact. Moral of the story here is the guys didn't know what they didn't know. They just didn't know that this happened because no one went and saw it. No one was out there. And once you start to look, the secret's in there. So let's learn how to find the secrets. So strategic irrigation management, matching irrigation with plant water requirements, real simple. We're setting up the plant for success, and note, roots are everything. You have a bigger root system, you're going to be more successful. So I just took my next point. Managing, we want to manage irrigation and drainage. So we want to keep water on target. We want to make sure we put the fertilizer on target. We want to manage production risk, so season to season. Essentially, we talk about taking that seed and converting it into money, and it's a factory out there in the field, but it's a factory in an open system. You can't control what happens. Well, you can try and control one aspect of that, and that's irrigation. But beyond that, whether it's hot, whether it's cold, whether it rains, whether it doesn't, you've got to react to it. So you've got to know where you should be, where is the sweet spot, so you can get back on track if nature tries to drag you off track. So that's what I talk about production risk. And that, therefore, we need process control in that factory, and that's what irrigation templates are. So let's get into it. We've got this, the first time I've been working with probes, I don't know, my whole working career. And so I'd look at this and go, wow, the answer is this. But the management at Aquaspy didn't come from agriculture. I said, Dave, I know the answer's in there, but we can't, it's too much. You've got to actually tease all the information out, which is what good software does, is it helps you understand things. But it's still important to know how to read this. So I can't read an X-ray, give it to a doctor, and I'll say, yeah, you've got a broken leg. I can't read an ultrasound, but you go to an obstetrician and they'll say, yeah, you're having a boy. Soil moisture sensors, whether they're probes or anything else, or models or other things, are as important to irrigation management as an X-ray is to a doctor. an orthopedic surgeon or an ultrasound is to an obstetrician. It's fundamental. You've got to look inside, because that whole magic happens under the ground where you can't see it. The only way of getting water into a plant to turn it into money is through the root system. So you need to have a bigger root system, and how you irrigate will determine how big that root system is. I just gave you a story from Australia where they didn't know they were artificially creating a shallow root system because they kept stalling the plant out. So how do we know how big the roots are? I've got that probe. In this case, this was an aquaspy probe, and it's a 5-foot probe with 15 sensors on it. And so there was this pink line is 4 inches, and then 8 and 12 and 16, and all the way down to 60 inches. And so if we look across here, we can see this red line, for example, is flat. Then it starts to stair-step down. Or it's flat because there's no water use, and it starts to stair-step because there is water use. Well, if we start to look at that closely, you can see that the one above it is stepping at 20 inches. Then a few days later, or almost the next day, the one below it, at 24 inches, starts to step, and then the one below that at 28 inches starts to step. So I can actually watch, if I back this up, I can start to see that, visualize where the roots are. And that's really important, because once I know where the roots are, then I know what I'm dealing with. So with Pat's model, the depth of root system, the water availability is key. It's how big is your gas tank. And so knowing how big your gas tank is really crucial. And just as an aside, and if you think back of all the corn crops you've grown in recent memory, you think, okay, each season, what's a good season look like? Well, what's a bad season look like? Bad season is usually a cool, wet start and a hot, dry finish. Never as good as where it's a slightly drier start and good rains from halfway through the season. You know, a nice warm finish. It's always better. Why? That dry start is the plant has to go looking for moisture, sets itself up. Bad season, when you've got that cool, wet start, the plant doesn't have to try very hard. There's not a lot of demand on the plant, evaporative demand. Doesn't put its roots down, and suddenly the heat comes on and it's not ready to go. And so understanding this by reading it is really crucial. So that's lesson number one, of using a probe to understand what I've got. And I also talked about getting water on target. Well, actually, no, I'm preempting it because we'll go to this one, water infiltration. Same data set, okay? I'm just going to look at this in a different way. So we've got all these steps going up. Well, that's because we're irrigating or we're getting rainfall. And so if we look at that, and you've already heard Russ, I mean, I've even pointed to it on my last session, how when you watch the different layers step up, we zoom in on this, we can see that for this little event, the pink line at 4 inches went up, and the blue line at 8 inches went up, but the green line at 12 inches didn't move. It was a really small shower, and it only went down 8 inches. When I look at this next one, I can see that it went down to the light blue line at 24 inches, but didn't make it to the red line at 28 inches. I can see how deep it went. I can see that the next one went that deep as well. But I can also see these 3 events here, 1, 2, 3, over here. So remember I talked about that relativity with the rifle shot? I've got a nice straight shooting rifle, and I've laid down a shot, and then I can do another one, and I know that it's going to go through the same point. Well, if you look across the top of these pink peaks, right, when I get to the same number, I've got the same moisture content. I know that. It doesn't really matter what it is, but I know that I've never got higher than this. And by the way, when I do, it drains pretty quickly. It drops sharply, and then it tends to have a shoulder, and that tends to marry up all the way across here. So just on the pink line alone, I know how much water that pink line at 4 inches can hold. Well, I can see here that didn't get back up to that imaginary line. It hasn't filled the bucket. This one hasn't filled the bucket. By the time I get to there, I'm pretty close to having filled the bucket at that pink line. So I can start to see how full I am at that level. And then I look at the next line down and so on. So yeah, there's a bit to look at once you get comfortable at it. And quite often what we'll do is we'll turn them all off and then just look at one at a time. And then you can start to say, okay, you get a really good understanding of how full each layer is. But some well-written software will do that for you. And then it will present that single black line that says, okay, now this is my whole root zone. How full is it? So there's the gas gauge. But in this situation, well, that's what it does, but this is how you get in and understand what's going on inside it, and it's where all the magic happens. So then, when it comes to irrigation, you want to get water on target. What do I mean by that? Well, if it's running out of the roads and down the road, that's clearly not on target, right? So that's bad. Sometimes that may happen because you've got one spot in the field where it's just going to run. You try and avoid that, but that's you may say that's an acceptable loss, but ideally you don't want any water running out of the field. But you also don't want water going past the root zone either. So you have to know how big the root zone is. But you can also use probes to determine when it's going past. So if coming back to that pot that I was talking about earlier with my watering can, and I wet it up and then I put more water on, well, if all the ability for that soil to hold the water is all taken up, that water drains out the bottom. And so I pour more water on. As I said, it goes straight through because there's nowhere for it to stick. Well, going straight through is like a wave. Think of it like a wave going up a beach, but it's a wave going down through the pot. And what that looks like is a little blip up, and then it comes straight back to the same point. So I started out here and I finished there. It didn't really change the moisture content, but it's gone up and down really quickly because that wave has gone through, past the sensor. So it's drainage. So there's a signature that says, am I wetting it up enough? There's a signature that says, am I pushing it past, what the soil can hold? And so you can get a pretty good feel for how well I'm doing. So I'm not getting it deep enough, slow the pivot down. I'm basically getting it out the bottom, probably stop irrigating. So yeah, because the soil's full at that level. So yeah.
What was your process, and just a quick answer, but how did you know how long you wanted to make this probe, that you knew where you want to get your readings from?
Well, different companies have different probe depths. So for example, Aquaspy has a 24 and a 48 inch probe. I spent 3.5 hours with Tom Moore yesterday just discussing stuff, and he said, Dave, I want a 6-foot probe. He said, and I want to put it a foot underground. I want it all. He's measured roots down past 85 inches. Admittedly not many, but so the probe that we've been using is an AquaCheck probe. They come in everything 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, up to 5 foot. I don't think they do a 6-foot one. Centec, they make similar, different size probes. So Aquaspy did a one-size-fits-all to try and be like Southwest Airlines and have one kind of airplane. You just got one set of spares, one set of everything. Different companies will do different things. So if that answers the question.
Yes, sir.
Generally speaking, 4 foot is a pretty good number because most of what happens, that Pat showed you the percentage of roots, 40, like the 4, 3, 2, 1, 40%, 30%, 20%, 10% in the first, second, third, fourth foot. That's a really good rule of thumb. I did a lot of work with Monsanto, Bayer. Now the reason I live in St. Louis is because I came out from Australia to put literally 1,000 probes out with them in all different projects, and one of which was breeding to look at root depths. And so, yeah, they were trying to work that out, and we were using 5-foot probes there. Never went to a 6-foot probe because it wasn't available. But probably, certainly in a lot of situations, roots were going down 5 feet. I've got data that I'll show you on this presentation that goes down 5 feet. So you could argue, certainly in this area, if you go to Nebraska, you go to eastern Nebraska, you could get away with a 20-inch probe. Those guys water so much that it's crazy. They don't use nearly enough soil volume, which is why they've also got nitrates in the groundwater. That's another story. So, yeah, does that
Yes, sir.
answer your question?
I've got another question. Back to that blip, how do you know if you're at the lower depths, if you're just increasing the soil moisture versus it's running through?
Yeah, great question. I quite often look at it and go, is that blip really just a little, like here, right? There's a blip there because water has probably just gone down the side of the probe a little bit and it didn't wet out. It's where it stays on the other side of that, right? So I'm going from here to there, it goes higher and comes back. Maybe that's just a little bit of, it dried out, sort of cracking kind of, but water is just running potentially down the side of the probe. If you've got a real crack, you'll know it because it'll just, you'll have a huge blip and it'll come back to where it was, where it hasn't wet up at all, and then subsequently it'll wet back up again. So, you know, in here, it comes up and it stays high. It comes up and it stays high. Well, I've caught that water. I can see that this has come up and it stayed. I'm banking that. You know, here it's come up and come back to, if I get that off the screen, it starts to get some good repeatability. Okay, so once you can see the same signature happening multiple times, it gives you a lot more confidence. So think of it like a tide on a beach. If I see the tide come up once, I'll think, okay, there's a high tide mark. But I see it come up to the same point 3 times, I know that's the high tide mark. It's a little bit like that, if that explains it. But you know, you can see it got a little higher here on that yellow line. It came up, but it went down. It just didn't quite catch it all. So there's some water that's gone past there, and it's possibly just a little bit like if you use the beach example, a wave that's come up and sort of back to its resting point. But it's the reason it went past. It may not be that it's draining everywhere, it may be just right near where the probe is.
So if you go back over closer to the left-hand side, if you would see blips where those lines are straight and it would just go up and come back down to the same place, then it's just, you would know it's just running through?
Running through, yeah. I mean, like back here, right? I mean, water's hit that point. It's not a huge blip up. I'll show you some data where it's got a huge blip up. So then you know it's running through. And you also, because it's as wet as that soil's ever been. I mean, it's wet and it's blipping up. It means that water's, yeah, running through. But it is, hey, I've been doing this for 25 years and I still look at some data and go, yeah, is that, it could be this or that. So it's not an exact science, which is, the other thing too, I'll say it's really important when using any sensor is to pan right back and look at where you started. If I'm only looking at a really small part here, like a week or 2 weeks or even a month, I might miss the whole piece over here where I've seen, it's actually told me, you know, how wet it can be. And so it's really important to pan right back and get your reference points, which is why we put those lines in there anyway, by the way, so that you can peg them and know, you know, where am I relative to where it should be.
So how do you know that as wet as you can be though? How do you know where that's at?
Good point. So remember we talked about slurry at the start? We're putting mud around the probe. So this little tail in here is not an accident. It starts high because they've got mud, and then it dries back to the ambient conditions. So I know that saturated soil is going to be sort of close to where this starts. It gives me a really nice reference point. And so if you're out there installing sensors and you think, oh, well, I'll get the data feed tomorrow, I install it today, I'll get the data feed tomorrow, that's not what you want. You want to get it from the time that you put it in so you can actually see that reference point. It's really, really handy. Because when I add all that together on my single black line, it'll actually be more exaggerated. And I'll show you also at the end, if the soil's really dry, it takes a really long time. It comes down a long way, but it takes a really long time to tail away because it's continually sucking that moisture away from the slurry. Whereas if it comes down and straight across, it's basically taken no time to equilibrate, i.e. the surrounding soil is pretty wet. So, keep going. Let's talk about fertigation. So how can I use soil moisture sensors for as a fertigation tool? Well, fertigation by definition is adding fertilizer to the water. So if I can see where the water goes, I know where the fertilizer goes. I want to fertigate, I want to apply the fertilizer to my root system. Well, if I can see where my root system is, I know where the target is. So far, there's 2 really nice ways of using a soil moisture sensor for fertigating. Some companies, AlphaSpy and other companies using Syntec probe, we've got one as well that measures EC, electrical conductivity. So the more ions I've got in the water or in the soil solution, the more conductive it is. If it's warmer, it's more conductive. If it's wetter, it's more conductive. But if I add ions to the IONS, ions, then it becomes more conductive. Or what's in fertilizer is a whole bunch of ions, polarized molecules that change the conductivity of the soil. So if I add fertilizer, I expect the conductivity to go up. If I add water, it should go up as well. But if I add water, and the conductivity goes down, it means that I'm expecting it to go up. It should be more conductive if it's wetter, but if the conductivity actually drops, then the only thing that could cause that is if there's less ions in the soil, i.e. a washed fertilizer out the bottom, or salt. If you go to California, they're trying to leach because they've got lots of salt. So we can use EC to track that. So this is obviously it's a data set. This is potatoes that was grown on some raised beds on a pretty sandy soil. And they had a big 3-inch storm here. And you can see right down here, we're 4 feet down, 48 inches. That storm came up and it banked moisture, so it got there and it stayed there in the soil. But if we look at and just have a look here, that the blue line and the green line went up, okay? They went up. But if we look here, the blue line and the green line went down. So what I'm looking at here is the conductivity. Moisture went up, conductivity went down. There's only one way I can explain that, and that is if I've cleaned up the soil, washed ions out of the soil, i.e. where's the washed fertilizer out? Where's it gone? Well, down here at 44 and 48, down 44 and 48 inches, they've jumped up. Yes, the moisture went up. Yes, that will make conductivity go up, but I mean, I can tell you washed it out of the top, and it's probably ended up lower down. And certainly didn't wash out from down here. And then we've gone all the way through the season. By the way, more rain here. You can see the irrigations. More rain, and big rain back here. That big rain went all the way to the bottom here, and it went all the way to the bottom there, but it was a much bigger event. And at the end of the season, we've already cleaned up the topsoil. The topsoil is, the conductivity hasn't changed much in the 8 and the 12 inch, but it jumped up massively deep down. Didn't jump up with the rainfall in here so much. That's jumped up because the soil was a little wetter. This has jumped up because it's wetter and it's got more fertilizer in there. So I can see that these guys have unluckily had fertilizer washed clear down 4 feet. So you're not going to get it with potato crop, I can tell you that much. But you may get it with planting corn or something that's deep rooted in there. So talk about irrigation templates. We're always looking at all the individual sensors. So if we bring all those together in a single line, then we can plot one line on the graph. And that line is, like Russ was saying, is a gas gauge. And so now I can put a line across the top here to say, well, my soil can't hold anymore. My tank is full across the top. So that's my full point. And then I can watch the data and look for the inflection point of when that stress really starts to bite. And I can say I don't want to let the soil get any drier than that. Then I can have an optimum band, and I can say, well, I want to try and do these sorts of, I want to keep it in this zone. I don't want to wet it up more than that. The soil could hold it, but I don't want to wet it up more than that. I don't want to dry it down more than that. So I can start to have different colors, and this becomes a really nice management tool because there's a lot of different software platforms out there that will give you the latest readings just as a colored icon. So you can look at 100 sites really quickly, scan down the colors and say, it's green, I'm in this zone where I want to be. It's blue, I'm too wet, or it's red, I'm too dry, or it's yellow, I'm down I'm too dry from where I want to be. It's not critical yet, but it's drier than where I want to be. So this, which happens to be from an almond crop in California, is a whole year, but it maps out conversion of water into money. That's what it is. And so if I keep it in this, you don't know that straight up, I must say this, give yourself a minimum of 2 years. First year you benchmark yourself. Am I going to be, like, I got to understand the system. When I irrigate and I put an inch on, what happens? When I put 2 inches on, what happens? You know, I need to know, getting control of my system. I look at what I did versus what I got from my yield, and I can say, okay, I'm going to look at this part of the season and that part, I'm not going to miss this. I came in, I didn't wet it up enough at the start, whatever it happens to be. I didn't dry it down at the finish, but I'm going to tweak that. So next year, I'm going in with my eyes open, and I can get off and running. The trouble with all the existing equipment out there right now is you've got to start to find that template. It's a little bit like I've got a template. Anyone that's as old as me will remember at school you used to have an overhead projector and you'd have like the acetate sheets and you could slide those around. Well, this is the same thing with the templates. You've got to try and work out when you put the probe in, how wet's wet, and then I can benchmark myself off there and off I go. With being able to put a probe in permanently, I've already done that from last year. I haven't changed the probe, so now I'm already off and running. I know where my start point is and everything else. But that is a template, and we'll talk about making those up. The last point I want to make about using probes to make money is the final irrigation. How do I know when to finish? And quite simply, we've benchmarked the whole season. So you can see this is the irrigation template. This is an older slide. This is corn. You can see here that the reason this green bit goes down is because we want to finish with dry soil. Why do I want to do that? Well, it's a little bit like if I rent a car, which I do all the time, and I paid for the gas in the tank, I'm going to bring it back empty. I don't want to bring it back with half a tank of gas because that's money on the table. I want to run it out. Same with what happens with watering the soil. That's money that you want to use up that season because you might get lucky and get some rain, get it topped back up again over the winter. The other reason, as a more fundamental reason, apart from simple economics, is that if I drive heavy machinery on wet soil, I get compaction. I'm actually destroying my resource. And 1 year of compaction could take like years and years of fixing, and why do it? Simply avoid it. So you want to finish the crop out. You don't want to short it. You want to make sure you put just the right amount of water on to I've often used the analogy of a car race, right? I want to make sure I get over the finish line with my foot hard on the gas. I don't want to slow down, but I don't want to cross the finish line with any more gas than I need to do that, and maybe another lap or two just as a buffer. So I've got to work out what my consumption rate is. I've got to know where the finish line is. And so as Russ, who's actually been listening to me because I taught him this, about black layer, the crop, when it's physiologically mature, when we're talking about corn, it's still green. When it's green, it's photosynthesizing, it's using water. So you can't just turn the water off. It still needs to finish out. Yes, it's using less and less and less and less, but it's still green. So it still needs water for about 2 weeks after black layer. Admittedly, it's going to get less and less, but if you can't, so you've got to work out, where dead is, where black layer is likely to be. Even at black layer, you can still, well, you're going to have to make this decision earlier, but you can predict what that date is likely to be, and say, okay, here is my finish line. And you can say, well, I've got the root system to dry the soil out that much. I got there already in the season. I'm not guessing. I measured it, so I can get there again. If it's cotton, I can go way past that because I'm going to suck more water out from lower down. But certainly, if it's corn, I can just draw a line across here, and it's real simple geometry as far as the end date, the amount of moisture, and there's the X marks the spot. As long as I come in with a little bit of moisture above that, a little bit of gas in the tank at the finish line, I'm good. I don't want to finish right up here. And well, real life example is some data. Yeah, I put Evan on the spot here because this is actually from his farm. I don't know if this was I don't know if you can remember back to 2012, we had this discussion where crop had used the soil, like you pretty limited water. What sort of gallonage or have you got on your wells there?
That's probably 4 gallons a minute.
Yeah, and so basically classic using the soil moisture at the critical time. So that's why this has gone down, because we're actually taking it out of the soil. That's good. But then the crop water use levels off and keep up with it. But there's no reserve tank anymore. You've used the soil moisture. So if the minute you stop irrigating, that crop's going to give 4 days and we're done. So the decision here was you've got to keep going to the end, stop irrigating and bang, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days and it's done. So you had to keep irrigating all the way to the end. That's the decision. Had another field that you didn't have enough water to do the whole circle, so you did a part of the circle, windshield wide, and to get the gallons up. But now you've got presumably more, I don't know what, in 5, 5.5, I don't know. So going along, developing the root system, that's awesome. Following the template. Got to the point here where the crop water use is really tailing off, but the irrigation now is greater than what the plant needs, because the water use is going down. The irrigation is just the same, exactly the same as it's been, but we're banking moisture. So the decision there was, hey, let's take what's there, stop irrigating, and dry the soil out. And I'm not sure if you gave a little bit at the end or a rainfall, but once again, just same farm, neighbouring circles, two different decisions. But getting there with confidence, making the right decision. So, yeah, talk about irrigating for profit. Okay, so we're converting water into money. So we don't harvest the whole crop unless you're cutting silage or hay or something like that. We're getting part of the crop. So let's take a grain crop. What is yield? Yield is the number of grains, it's simple math, times the size of the grains. That's it. How do I get water to help me with this? If I then look at test weight, look at quality, it's that yield, right? The number of grains times the quality of the grain equals money. Simple stuff. But remember I said water has the single biggest impact on yield and quality? Well, that equals money. So the water is going to impact all these different parts, and we need to know that when creating a strategy. And so it's really important to see, what time have I got till? 3?
About 55 minutes, 50 minutes.
Lots of time for questions. So, yeah, we need to convert that water to the part that pays. So, let's take corn. This is out of a textbook that talks about the percent yield reduction if I get stress at different times, right? And it also looks like a water use curve. So, the thing to note here is that if I get stress during this tasseling to blister stage, and during that reproductive stage, I can get a 50% yield loss. Well, I'd suggest it's worse than that, because if you had dryland corn versus irrigated corn in this fully irrigated region, you're going to get way less than half. So it's real, and you know that. You had a drought year in 2011, yields were half of what they would normally be. Why? Because, well, we need, so number one, critical thing. Remember I said that I can drive my lawn to be small because I'm changing my irrigation practice? If you flip that around and you say at certain times my crop, if I short the crop water, it's going to hurt. Well, that's exactly what this is. I need to be absolutely aware of what are my danger points. And my danger point is right there. I've got to have enough water or I'm going to lose yield. So it comes back to that genetic potential. Why aren't I getting 800 bushels in my corn seed? Because I'm not getting enough water. That's a big part of it at this time. Why not? Because I can't supply it. I don't have the irrigation capacity to keep up. And Jordan did a beautiful job. I love the numbers. So go back to them in her presentation about how many, like with the well capacity and gallons per acre per minute, and had graphs that looked remarkably similar to this. And by changing the plant date, you can actually shift this. You can make that area under that graph a little smaller. So you can actually, if you've got less gallons per acre per minute, shift the plant date back, you can actually get by with less gallons per acre per minute because you've got a lower ET, lower total ET. That was really, I loved what you had put forward. But as far as this is concerned, we've got an irrigation deficit. Pat talked about it. It's real. And so where am I going to get that water from? I'm going to get it out of the soil. And it's so there's only one way I can get water here. I can get it out of the sky, or I can get it out of the soil. Well, I know I can't control what comes out of the skies, but I can control what comes out of the soil. But there are two aspects to that too. Just because I put it in there doesn't mean I'm going to get it out. I have to have the root system to get it out. So I've got to have a big root system, and I've got to have water there. So it's not just putting water in the soil, it's putting water in the soil and having the roots to get it. That's the really critical thing here. And I'll tell you why. So in a drought year, your ability to supply water goes down because it blows away. It's hot and it's windy and it just evaporates. And the other thing is that the deficit hits earlier and it lasts for longer because the evaporative demand is higher. So yeah, what we're trying to do is increase our ability to supply water, which is why the later planting dates help and that sort of thing. But irrespective, if I come back to this water use curve, there is only, well, there's 2 times that I can supply water above what the plant needs. It's when the plant's not there, that's pre-irrigation, and we talked about that this morning. Or it's after I've planted, but before the water use takes over what I can supply. So I have an opportunity in here, and Jordan gave some really good reasons why you don't want to put too much on too early. And so maybe get yourself to 75% with pre-irrigation, maybe you don't even go that far, maybe you do. But at the end of the day, when you hit this point here, you have to be full. There is no question. You have to be, you have to have as big a root system as you can, and you have to have as much water in there as you can, because that's what's going to carry you through here. So that's, and there's the critical point that Pat was talking about. Don't start too late. You've got to fill it up. So we're all coming together here. It all makes sense. But what I'm going to tell you is how you do this matters. When I first started working with farmers out here in 2010, standard rule of thumb, 1 inch every 4 days. Start my pivot on, you know, whatever date it is, but it's probably going to be late April, early May, and I turn it off. Big joke I've heard a few people say is, how many irrigations do you put on? Just 1. You know, I start it and I let it run, and it's 1 irrigation. There's no other decision to be made. But what was happening and what we found, we ran out of 2010 into 2011, and it's a drought. 1 inch every 4 days doesn't cut it. What we found really, really quickly, as in first irrigation, first turn of the wheel, is that that didn't go deep enough. And so there's a whole lesson to be learned about going deeper or slowing the pivot down. But when you slow the pivot down, what happens is, a little bit like with the cotton example from Australia, the plant gets a little bit thirsty, so it puts its roots a little deeper. And then when the pivot comes over, instead of putting 1 inch out, you're putting 2 inches out, you fill it back up again. Then you go another 8 days, the plant gets a little bit thirsty, puts its roots a little deeper, then you fill it back up again. So going slow, I'm not changing the number of hours I run that well. If I told you to turn the well off, I'd probably run out of town because you don't have enough water. It's, you know, heretical speak. But how you use it matters. And so how I take that 4 or 5 gallons per acre per minute and use it really matters. Now, can I put 2 inches on per pass? Maybe, maybe not. That's where soil structure, soil health really comes in. So I've got to actually create soil, because it's flat out here. I mean, it generally, within reason, doesn't run off. The soil can take it, but I've got to be able to have structure that can get it in. So anything I can do to improve my infiltration rate matters. So, I mean, no-till, standing stubble, apart from stopping the soil from blowing away, those plants rot out and the roots rot out and they create pathways. I showed you some data earlier from where corn, I had a probe that was basically, you know, in the plant line, and 15 inches away was last year's plant line, and all the water was running in there. It matters. I proved it to myself and to the farmers at the time that that's where the water goes. And so if you come through and plow it, you break all that up. So think of it like a whole lot of straws going into the soil. As soon as I plow the soil, I've broken up those pathways. And if you think about, if you've ever been out, I don't know, maybe you parked the plough 10 years ago, but days when you were ploughing a wheat field, and probably haven't grown wheat for 10 years either, but if you're out there ploughing it up with a disc and it started to rain, and you came back, you got an inch or 2 of rain, you came back out to resume, where you've ploughed is going to be still muddy as hell, like 2 days later, but where you had the wheat stubble standing there, 2 days later, you could drive out there in your pickup truck. I mean, what's happened is that the water on the ploughed side has only gone down to the depths of the plough, like 10 inches, and sat there. And it hasn't infiltrated, and it's sat there, which is why it's muddy. The other side, straight down. I mean, in an extreme example, you could probably drive on it the next morning after 2 inch rain, you know, not get mud on your boots, because it's all gone in, and that's what you want. So creating those conditions is really, really important. So good irrigation management goes hand in hand with good soil practices. And so strip till's great, no till's probably better, but anything you can do to just keep parts of that soil in a more or less virgin condition are going to really, really help you. And then of course build organic matter and other things. So, coming back to where we are here, getting water in the soil. What was happening with people going around an inch every 4 days, just as the plant was running out of water, more water came on. So I didn't have to put my roots deeper. And then just as the plant was running out of water, 4 days later, more water came on. So I'm creating a lazy plant. It's a little bit like me sitting on the couch watching football, and I'm almost at the end of my beer, and someone puts another one in my hand. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. And then I'm almost at the end of that one, and someone puts another one in my hand. And, you know, I'm going to have a hard time getting off the couch. And so the plant's no different, right? Whereas if you actually make it do the work, then it will be fitter and ready for prime time. And so I'm not talking at all about stressing the crop. I'm just talking about not over irrigating it, and there's a huge difference. If the water is in the soil, let the plant do plant stuff, and that is grow roots and get it. And that's all I'm saying, is that's why you want to start out with good soil moisture, because plants will only grow into moist soil. And so you've got to put the water in there, but then give the plant time and encouragement to go get it. And early on, yes, you've got B6 where that ear is forming. It happens real early, but it doesn't mean you have to overwater it at that point. It just means you have to have water readily available. It means when you look at the graph, the stair step is still as good as it was the day before. It means that you're not limiting it, but it doesn't mean that you have to overwater it. Just let the plant go and get it. If you're growing cotton, well, we'll get onto that when we grow cotton. So, big difference, and it's only a day, right? A day can make a huge difference in terms of sending the right message. So we want to wet the soil up here, no question. We want to get to this point with a full bucket, absolutely. We want to do it with a big root system. So slowing down, one simple thing, can actually give us greater access to moisture at that critical time. So if I've gone an extra foot with my roots, I've got 2 inches of water. You go another foot on beyond that, I've got another 2 inches of water, give or take. And so I can provide water at a time that I need it, and I can bend that line, that water availability line. And if so I can actually potentially save some water up here by not overwatering early. So I could maybe save a turn of my pivot, which might be 1.5 inches there. I could probably save a turn of my pivot here, which is 1.5 inches there. So what Scott Sloane said this morning, wouldn't it be great if everyone could save 1 inch in this area and have, you know, however many million acre feet saved. So it's not pie in the sky to say that you can save water and increase yield. You've just got to be strategic about it. And so that then gives you water at that time when you need it. So we're now putting water into the yield, that we're directing it into something that's going to pay us money rather than something that won't. Let's talk about sorghum. How do we irrigate sorghum? So we have a water use curve across the vegetative phases of the crop, the phases of the crop. And I want you to, well, really the critical time. So sorghum forms a panicle, and anyone who's looked at it will know that you've got really big bushy ones. A great yield is like these panicles that are huge and filled with seeds versus one that's a little spindly and doesn't have many seeds on it. It only produces, I mean, yes, it tillers, but the size of that panicle on the main tiller really matters. Grain number matters. The grain size, not so much. And so it's setting, see, that size of that ear right back here at basically 35 to 40 days after emergence, really early on. So people that think, oh, I'm going to grow sorghum with my corn because that's my rotation, I'm going to split my water, sorghum will get what the corn doesn't need. Be careful. Now you can do it with stored soil moisture, don't get me wrong. So, but you've got to have the moisture in there. Because the plant will do what the plant wants to do, it'll grow its roots, providing it's got access to moisture, we're good. But you've got to give it access to moisture. And so here is some research that was done on this farm, I believe. I don't know what year it was, but we've got irrigations pre-plant, 30 days after emergence, 45 days after emergence, flowering, booting, or booting flowering stage, and then during grain fill. Irrigations at every one of those times is the benchmark yield, 100%. So what gave the next highest yield? Well, when I missed the final irrigation at grain fill. So what does that tell me? It tells me that I need to irrigate reasonably early, or let me rephrase that, I need to provide access to moisture to my sorghum crop early, so that I make sure that it looks ahead and goes, wow, this is going to be a great season, I can fill all these seeds, I'm going to create a big panicle, high seed number. Later, it's going to extract every bit of moisture out of that ground to fill every one of those seeds, because it doesn't have a huge elasticity in seed size. And so, but I'm not the expert in sorghum, so I'll be happy to be corrected from Jordan up the back there. But we had a quick chat at lunch, and I think I'm on the right track there. The one that had the worst, with basically less than half, well, apart from no irrigation, was when you missed the early irrigation. So we're now irrigating late in the season, but I can't catch up. If I haven't got the seeds, doesn't matter how big they are, I can't catch up. So I have to provide moisture, whether it's irrigation or stored soil moisture, but I have to provide crop moisture early in that sorghum life cycle, or I will not catch up. So be very careful when you're doing a split rotation with sorghum, that you make sure that if you can't irrigate it, that it's got access to moisture, stored soil moisture. So what does that look like? I mean, essentially we're trying to keep it wet at the start, and then we're letting it dry down at the finish in terms of an irrigation template. With wheat, I probably don't need to dwell on this because there's not much wheat grown here anymore. But the key thing here is this is really my relative ET versus the relative yield. And I can tilt the whole equation heavily in if I irrigate at flowering, I can actually get much greater value for my water than any other time. But if I irrigate during vegetative time, I get less value for my water, way less value. So if I'm, depending on either side of this line here, if I'm on the top side of that line, I'm not getting value for my water. If I'm on the bottom side of this line, I'm getting really good value for my water. And the biggest value for water is when I irrigate around flowering, and then closely followed by grain fill. So it's what happens in the back half of the season really makes your wheat crop. You do need to have a wheat stand. You need to provide the machinery to get there, don't get me wrong. But in terms of value for money, it's reversed to sorghum. It's sort of weighted on the back end, because wheat is a crop that will both abort grains and have very variable grain size to the point where it's pinched and you can't sell it. So, yeah, I won't dwell on wheat, but so let's talk about cotton. So cotton's the big one around here these days. And we've got a number of bowls, tons the size of the bowls, equals yield, and then we've got quality. But as, once again, Russ pointed out at lunchtime, quality matters. You've got staple length and you've got micronair. And quality happens, see, cotton is this amazing or amazingly frustrating, depending on where you sit, crop. I love it because you've got to grow it. It won't grow itself. And it's a bit like driving a sports car with a really narrow clutch. You've got to learn how to drive it. It's trying to be vegetative, it's trying to flower, and it's trying to fill fruit all at the same time. And so you've got to get those things in balance. And you get them out of balance, it starts to go in one direction or the other, and you're in trouble. Too much water, it goes vegetative. Too little water, it cuts out on you. And there's a sweet spot. And so it's where you really have to be in that sweet spot, and really good things will happen. And then you've got to finish it at the end of the season to make sure you get that quality, because the last thing that happens, you've got staple length, the last thing is the micronair. You might run out of heat, and you can't help that, but if you have the heat and you run out of water, then you're going to get low mic. It's just going to happen, because it won't thicken out on you. And you'll get variable fruit, because you've got different maturities as you go through. So here is a cotton water use curve. Happens to be in millimetres because it came from Australia, but just to put that line in there. That, and this is an Australian curve. I think, Jordan, you were 0.28 inches per day, because this is a higher environment, elevation here at 3,600 feet. But that was just mainly to give you a reference point as far as what this graph means. But the same rules apply in that as far as when to irrigate. We don't want to irrigate right at squaring, you want to just provide adequate moisture. But as this comes on, so this water use curve, think of it, my sports car analogy, I really like it because it's a little bit like clutch control, right? As the load comes on, it's like letting out the clutch. That's the load. So the plant's doing that. But what we're doing with our irrigation is putting your foot on the gas pedal. And if you put your foot on the gas pedal too soon, back here you spin the wheels. What happens? It throws the fruit off. It wants to be, it says, okay, I've got more time, a longer season, I'm going to go be vegetative again, and it'll try and grow taller and be more vegetative. And especially if you do that while it is vegetative, before it's even started squaring, then you will end up in a world of hurt. So you've got to wait for the load to come on. And it's a sort of a tricky thing, other than you can watch it on the graph. And so once it starts to pick up in its demand for water, you've got to give it a little bit more water. And so you basically give it the gas until the point where it's really at the steepest part of this curve and you're giving it all the gas you can within reason. So within your rotation, sharing water with other crops. So what this looks like, if anyone's ever done fruit mapping on a cotton plant, it's just like clockwork in terms of where all the fruiting positions. And so early on, most of your yield is going to come through the middle of the plant. What happens at the top, in this environment I'd forget it because the season's too short. If you're in a really long season environment like California, you can keep pushing that plant higher and higher and fill out the fruit at the top. But essentially what you've got to do is grow the plant, try and get the early fruit on if you can and hold it. And before we had GM crops, you'd have to worry about insects and other things. But try and get that load on and really give it the gas. But it's through the middle of the plant that you're making really all the yield. And then you want to cut it out. And you want the plant to stop being vegetative. You want it to stop flowering. You want to just make it fill what it's got. Because I know winter is coming. Game of Thrones. Winter is coming, and it's going to run out of heat. And so you've got to work backwards from when you think you're going to run out of heat and have a last effective flower. I don't know what that date is here, but there will be a magic date that says any fruit I produce after this date, I will not have enough heat to fill. I'm not going to do it. So I want to cut the plant out. How do I cut the plant out? I try and shock it with water stress to make it think, oh, time to finish up now. I've got to stop being vegetative, the season's done, and let the flowers come to, well, it'll stop flowering. The flowers sort of come to the top of the plant and that's it. Then you've still got to finish out the fruit that you've got. So you don't stop irrigating, you give it a moisture shock, and then you try and fill it out to the end, but by keeping the stress on. What I mean by that is called deficit irrigation. It's pretty simple. So fiber elongation, fiber thickening, and of course you've got fruit at different maturity dates because they're all laid down at different times. But this is where, right at the end of the season, and heat is going to have as much to do with it as anything. But don't get greedy and keep pushing and saying, well, you want to. It's probably going to take about 35 days, I think, to go from square to mature bulb. And I'm a little rusty on this and how many day degrees it is, but it's a really defined period of time, and you've got to work backwards from when you think you're going to run out. And every hour cotton goes below 60 degrees. It takes another hour above 60 degrees to replace what you've lost, and then you'll start going forward. So if you get like 2 cold nights, it's going to take you 4 warm days to basically recover. And so that's what I mean by running out of heat. You might get beautiful sort of warm conditions, but if it comes after a cold spell, that might just get you back to what you lost. And so it's at this elevation, things cool off real fast. So you've got to plan to shut that crop down. And guys that are trying narrow row cotton and going with really high density, smaller plant, smaller bolls per plant, gets there more quickly, and then they can shut it down, but you're still carrying the yield and you'll get really good quality because they've got a longer time to finish out the crop. So that's part of the high density cotton strategy. Costs more, seed doesn't come for free. But essentially what we're trying to do with this template We don't want to get it back to wet, otherwise it's going to go vegetative. We want to try and fill the bucket but not all the way. We want to try and keep it going as long as you can. Essentially, if this is a stock chart, you want to go along, not increasing, not decreasing, but go along flat as long as you can, and then head for the finish line. And so there is an absolute need to dry the crop out at the end, because of course you do want to shut it down. You want to make sure the stress helps the bolls open. And of course, if a bowl doesn't open, then it's not going to be harvestable. So deficit irrigating means you can put little amounts of water on, but you don't want to wet it all the way back up to full. So you can stair-step it to the end, little bits, little bits, little bits, but you want to be heading in that downward direction, absolutely. Or else it'll want to go vegetative on you again. Water budgets. So what do I mean by water budget? I mean by sharing water between crops. I have a set volume that I can get out of this, or a set flow rate out of my pivot, and so I have to not only know, it's all about timing. Timing is everything. So if I can only get water out of my pivot at 500 gallons a minute, but I need the maximum rate for corn at a certain period of time, might be more like 6.5 gallons per minute just for a few weeks of the season. I've got to plant the right amount of acreage to be able to deliver that, but also if I've got another crop, I need to be able to take water from that at that critical time so that I can short one to give it to the other. And so that's what I mean by water budgets. So this is some data from Joe Reinert, who sadly is no longer with us, but he was a farmer up at Stratford. And he was the forerunner to the 212 program that the water district ran with for a few years, from, I don't know, 2011 or 10 to 13, somewhere in there. This was his standard circle. He basically wanted to irrigate his crop, but he did limited water. I think it was 450 gallons a minute, if I remember. Don't get behind. Don't get behind, don't get behind. It won't catch up. I've got a limited amount of water. So what does he do? He just keeps the gas on and then finishes out the crop. When you keep the gas on too early, well, what he didn't do was basically let the crop grow a big root system, and then fill it back up, remembering you cross that threshold where you've got to be full again. He thought if he let it dry out, it's never going to fill up, and so he just didn't get behind. What happened? Well, I'm going to go forward one because I'm on a right train of thought here. What happened? He had a shallow root system. His roots only got down to 28 inches. Now, we were asking before about what does drainage look like? This is what drainage looks like. See this blip? See this huge blip in here? That huge blip is because water has gone past that level in the soil. The purple line, which might be easy to see, has come way up and way back to the same point. Way up and way back, way up, and it hasn't changed the amount of water that's there because it's full. Well, guess what? At the end of the season, he did get some roots down there. He did take some of that moisture, and he got a 248 bushel crop, so not too bad. I'm pretty happy with that. But he's looking at this saying, man, I put water on there that has drained out the bottom, and it's possibly taken some fertilizer with it. What am I going to do? Let's cut that back. And if I cut it back, I've got to expect a lower yield too. But so the theory was I'm going to save all my water and put it on in the middle of the critical time and try and keep up. And so I come back to here where rather than keeping it wet all the way across, the theory was to let it dry down, then to wet it back up, keep it wet, and dry it down. This was the forerunner. We're going back now. This is 2010. The software doesn't look like it does now with the beautiful green shapes. But he basically let the plant roots go. He took water out of the soil, but he couldn't ever fill it back up. And so when we look at that, these roots went down and down and down and down and down. You can see this sort of stepping and stepping. By the way, if you look across here, it suddenly goes flat. Here, it's using water and it suddenly goes flat. Why? Because he suddenly started irrigating. So the crop's looking for water down deep, starts irrigating. The crop says, oh, I don't need to find it down there, that's too hard. I'm going to find it up here. But his water only went down 4, 8, 12 inches, didn't make it to 16. So he's now growing it on the foot. he's got a 4-foot root system, but he's taken all that reserve tank out when you need it. So that's why his yield, if I back it up here, went to 194 bushels, and the other one was 248, but he used a ton less water. And so I don't have the economics on the conversion, but I could almost guarantee this would have converted more water into money, but I don't have that. So he's thinking about this, saying, okay, I put too much water on here, I didn't have enough water there, what am I going to do? And this is back in 2010, so this is before anyone else had thought of it. I'm going to split this. Well, that's unfair because people were rotating crops all the time, but he was consciously thinking of it. How am I going to do this? I'm going to plant corn early, I'm going to plant corn late, I'm going to try and separate them out. So when my second late planting is in the early stage, I can take water from here and I can put it on the other side. Rather than having the split planting in the same pivot, you had 2 different pivots, but they were tied together so we could direct a lot of water over one side or the other. I guess you'd have to re-nozzle to do that, as opposed to windshield wiping one side. So a fair bit of effort in this, but this was done in 2011, and so the early plant actually was a wreck because it was a drought year and it had all the wind and the heat, and so he was able to actually write that crop off and pick up the insurance check, and then he had all the water that he planned to use anyway on the second site. So he took essentially the strategy was the same. I'm going to have twice as much water available at a key time. And so what he did, when he was focused on the other circle, he was still irrigating it, so he had to let this dry down and fend for itself. Then he was able to flip back and put all his guns, all his water on the one circle and effectively get a 900 gallon a minute well. And so he was able to wet that back up again. And so what he got in 2011, which not many people did, was 217 bushels, where everyone else was licking their wounds and calling in the silage cutters. He still made a crop. And so it was a really good result, because what he proved to himself is he not only did he get his roots down, this is 56 inches, this is 60 inches, they went all the way down. He was now able to get water down 3 feet because he had enough capacity there. So it was really about sharing water, and just the fact that it happened in 2011 was a problem. It was an abnormal year because it was that drought of record. But he managed to achieve what he set out to do and prove to himself that he could follow that strategy and get water all the way down. So what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that sharing water, really, it works and it matters, and you have to be really build it into your irrigation plan. So it's not just a water budget per se, but it's also getting to your template, getting right down to that level of saying that, what does my template look like? And you saw those big lines that I had on this graph here. This is really my strategy, what I'm trying to do. And so that's what a lot of the companies will help you do as well, is generate those templates. So next thing is, I said I'd finish on risk management, and this is the same farmer in his first 3 years of using soil moisture probes. So nature's going to throw you a curveball. There is no question it will happen. And so this is in Australia, and this guy had 3 seasons. This is year 1. It rained a lot, and then it didn't rain, and then it still didn't rain for a whole year, and then it rained for the back half of the season. And then in the 3rd year, it didn't rain at all, which then that lasted 5 years because they had a 5-year drought. So, but 3 completely different seasons. So here's a guy learning how to use this tool. First thing he did was he found a consultant who actually introduced him to the probes in the first place, who knew all about it. And how do we get through the first season? Well, this guy also had a brand new pivot. It's a bright, shiny toy. All I want to do is turn it on. I just want to turn it on. And his consultant, who knew how to grow cotton, and this is his first year of growing cotton as well, said, don't even think about it. This is vegetative, let it go. Let it do its plant thing and get its roots down. And all he wanted to do was irrigate. And so his consultant held him off. Well, guess what? It rained, and it rained again. So now he's back wetter than where he started. And then you can see these stair steps are getting bigger and bigger. Oh man, this plant's really growing. I need to irrigate. well, no, let's just hold off. I can see rain in the forecast. And guess what? It rained again. And guess what? We're back to where we started. So he's just picked up now a whole lot of free money right there. So then he starts to go, and these stair steps are getting really big, and he's now as dry as he was before. And what's more, the roots are now down to like 28 or 32 inches from memory. Time to go. So, and then what he's trying to do is that same strategy of just keep my stock level, you know, keep it, replace what it's using and hold it there as long as I can. And so he was holding it, and just replacing what the crop had been using. So it's just simple stuff. And then there's a really long gap between these two because he had to get a spray on. We're back before one of the GM crops, we had to wait for the right wind direction. And anyway, so it started to take moisture out of the soil. Never got it back, never was able to replace that because it's got a huge fruit load on it. But and then he finished it out by really drying it out and opening all that fruit. And there was moisture in the soil to basically finish out and get the good fiber quality. So he ended up getting a 4.2 bale crop, not shabby, but the district was 4 bales. So he started out year one, I got what my neighbours got. He wasn't expecting to do that. He thought, if I hit 3 bales, I'm going to be ecstatic. He got 4 because he was watching what he wanted to do. But what he was doing, he had a guy who had experience, but the trigger points were basically get that root established and then try and keep up with it. And that was it. And so they did. And so and he also saved a bunch of water back here, which if he put it on, it would have given him a lower yield and increased his cost. Year 2, remember this was the dry start and the wet finish. So totally 100% different season to the one before. So he's having to irrigate in here because he's got to keep the crop alive. I mean, yeah, it's young cotton. And I mean, cotton, when it comes out of the ground, all it wants to do is crawl back in. It just wants to die at the cotyledon stage. It just wants to die. Once it gets a couple of true leaves on it, you can't kill it. It's a weed. You can treat it really, really hard until it starts squaring. And then you have to start worrying about it. But before it's got a square on there, it can look really bad and it will still hang in there. And so he's keeping it alive, but notice he's not wetting it right up. He's just keeping it alive. But in order to grow a root system, you've got to have water down there for it to grow into. So he's trying to establish his root system. So he's trying to get the plant going. And then when he finally pulled the trigger because it started to square up, he's wet it up to where he started. He kept going, and it was pretty wet, but then it rained. And you can see here there's a long time between irrigations in the showers, but he shut off. All his neighbours who were kept going. I'm not going to shut the pivot off. I'll just let it go. And a lot of them are flood irrigated too. But he shut down and waited until he got back to where he knew he could fill it back up again. And so he's irrigating. Then it rained and got back up to here. And you'll notice that waterlogging. And so he shut off and he waited until he got back to that same point. I don't need a number. It's just a graph. It's all visual. I can see when I'm back to the same point. And then he's starting to wet it back up, try and recover back to sort of where he knew full was, and it rained again. And it rained again here. And then he's irrigating, but trying to plan that finish. Really important to dry it out at the end, to open up all those bowls and stuff. And guess what? He got the same yield, but everyone else who kept irrigating kept getting this kind of waterlogging and slowing it down. And you look at those steps compared to these big steps here. Those steps are the conversion rate of that water into money. And so the rest of the district got almost 3.6, but he's now well and truly in front of his neighbours. And he's only a second-year cotton grower compared to these other guys that have been doing it. They know better. So then he gets to the 3rd year, it didn't rain at all. And he had a well nozzled pivot. He could keep up with the crop pretty much. And so once again, big drench to try and push water down deep because the soil was dry. And then he just sort of let it go, but he's trying to just feed it. He knew the season was going to be dry. There wasn't any rain in the forecast. So I've just got to try and manage this out. And essentially what he was trying to do was keep it a little bit on the thirsty side so that its roots would go down, down, and down. You can see this line here on the bottom side. It's drying the soil out more because the roots are going down and taking the water out. So that's what he's trying to do. Just keep it a little bit stressed but at the same time, try and get it back up to the mark here. And so his pivot is basically slowing it down and putting on more and more water to try and replace what had been taken out. And you can see here he's now hit 5 bales. Well, guess what? The rest of the district, there's less than 4. So now he's on his way to buying out his neighbours, because that difference is all profit. And so, why am I showing you this? Because this is how you use this technology to try and get around what Mother Nature's throwing at you. And so it's a risk management tool. It's I want to try and make sure that I know what I need. I know that I'm being dragged off target, so I can get back on there. I can get back to where I need to be and hit that sweet spot. I haven't actually put any of those templates on here because this was so old that it was different software. But it's that same template that I showed you where I'm trying to keep things going straight and then head for the finish line. And that's so there's a lot of art in here as well as science. But the science all comes with the agronomy of what plants need at a certain time. And if you can get that right, you come right back to what happens inside the plant when I give it water, then you're going to be much better off for it. And so this is sort of where art meets science. But I think we've got a little bit of time for questions, because I believe lessons learned. This is not in the book, so don't go looking for it. Yeah, we need to get water in the root zone. So you've got to go slow. You've got to build a big root zone, and you've got to get water in there. So pivot speed matters, and just that simple thing of, we're not going to stop our well, but we're going to change our pivot speed. It really works. And the guys now, when I started, I said back in 2010, everyone's standard practice was an inch every 4 days, give or take. Now the standard practice, I believe, is more like 1.5 to 2 inches, or even more than 2 inches. And the reason you can put more than 2 inches on is because you're also using bubble mode and stuff like that, so you're not wetting the tracks anymore. If the pivot's running on dry soil, then it's not going to cut tracks, which is not going to wear out your gearboxes, which is not going to give you flat tires. If you're going at half the speed, you've got half as many turns around that field, so you've got half as much pivot traffic. And so it's if just driving the pivot around half as much, then you're going to get shallower wheel tracks, and so you're walking over that dry ground. So go as slow as you can with getting water on target. So getting it in the root zone, not below it, not having it run out of the field, but go as slow as you can. And you want to start the way you want to finish. So in 2011, which was obviously a lesson for everyone around here, Tom Moore, who's going to be here, we can ask him, he might be standing outside. He had a linear, walked a full mile, took 8 days to walk up, 8 days to walk back. Either end of that linear was getting a drink every 16 days. In the middle, getting a drink every 8 days. And then if you were part of the way up, you might have been getting 4 days and 12 days or something like that. But the yield monitor, all the way up and back along the rows, was absolutely dead even. She's got a 200 bushel, I believe, average for the field. On the west side, where the wind came, 170. On the east side, which was downwind, 230. And so the wind mattered, but the irrigation amount didn't. As in the amount mattered, but the plant just knew when it set itself up. Now, if he went from varied the speed of the pivot, it probably would have got him he would have come unstuck. But he obviously had soil that could take, and I think the application volume nominally was about 2.3 inches, or it was over 2. And so it was like a flood irrigation at either end. I mean, you were going over it with 2 and coming back with 2, 4 inches in the soil. But it was filling up over 3 feet. And so the plant had that to work with. So we didn't talk about, I hadn't mentioned this, but pivot speed also by slowing down. If you are going half the speed, you've got half let's say it takes 4 hours for the canopy to dry and the soil to dry, maybe longer, but in that 4 hours, if you're going half the speed, you've got half the wetted area. And anything that hits the soil or the plant canopy and is wet is going to evaporate. That's lost. It's not going in the soil. So if you've got twice the wetted area, you've got twice the losses. You slow down, you get more of it can go in the soil where the plant. A lot of people say, well, I've got to speed up, I've got to get there, the plant's going to die. Well, it's going to die if you don't put water in the root zone. So if you slow down, you get more in the root zone, the plant's going to do better. But you've got to start out that way so the plant knows what's coming, and it will get used to it and know what's coming. I don't know how it does it, but it just gets used to it. A little bit like my dog gets used to being fed twice a day. If it doesn't get fed, morning or night, it's cranky. Whereas if I had a working dog and it got fed every second day, it could go a third day, not a problem. It might get a little cranky, but it's not going to matter whether it's morning or night. It's sort of used to getting fed that way, and so plants are the same. So going slow is good, but you should start out that way. And so speed matters. Application method matters. So another thing that we've done that's different today than when I started is that very few people, well, not so very few, people that I've been working with directly have pretty much all switched to bubble mode, drag hose, well, going to like dragon line, things like that. People are trying to be innovative. So if you're going to bubble mode, people are going on 30-inch centers, not on 60-inch centers, because they've got too much dry soil in the middle. That doesn't work. I'm going to create a wetted strip. So I create a wetted strip because I don't want to wet all the surface area. I don't want to wet the plants at all. I don't want to wet all the soil. I just want to get it into the ground as quickly as I can and stop it from evaporating. So there's been massive changes in the irrigation infrastructure in the last 10 years or 9 years here. And it works. It really works. And so that's probably a good point to start with in the panel discussion. What are the changes people have made? We need to promote a larger root zone. Well, yeah, this going slow will promote a larger root zone. But roots grow into wet soil. So you can't just hold off and expect roots to grow there. You've got to have moisture in the soil to start with. So it may require some pre-irrigation to get it down there. And if you're going to pre-irrigate, my suggestion is you go slow and try and get it to go deep. And I'm not sure if it was a successful experiment, but I know Tom Moore was trying to do a 30-day pass and put 5 or 6 inches down in one hit. And yeah, neighbours were, I believe, telling him, hey, you left your pivot on. It's like, no, it's irrigating. It's just going really slow. And so just innovative things like that, because why put it on in 5 1-inch passes where you've got all this wet soil? Put it in 1 5-inch pass where you can just get it down there and push it deeper. So yeah, deeper root zone is going to give you better access to water nutrients, goes without saying, but it also gives you that buffering capacity as well. So in terms of you get up one hot day, it's growing it in a bigger pot, if you think of it like that. So you grow a plant in a bigger pot, you're going to have a better chance of handling those adverse conditions. And you've got to start with a full profile. You may not do all that with pre-irrigation, some good lessons learned this morning, but you've got to get there before the crop out overtakes your ability to supply water. Have to. And generally speaking, early in the season, you want to try and get there. So yes, you're going to do some fast laps to germinate the crop because you have to. You want to get it nice and even, get around there and get it germinated. Once it's up and going, you want to slow down and fill that back up. Yeah, and then those irrigation budgets, get that match your area, because you don't have to grow the highest yield to be the most profitable either. It's like you're certainly not going to get the most mileage out of your gas tank doing 85 miles an hour. You're going to get it doing 55 or 60. And so if water is your most limiting resource, which I believe it is, then you've got to think about that. And yeah, with that conversion. So I believe this is, yeah, pretty much it. So thank you for the opportunity.